Welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. My name is Dr. Gastard Harrigan, the podcast for current and emerging school leaders, those who support and supervise them. You will hear from passionate educational leaders who are transforming their schools, communities, and creating positive outcomes for students. I will also share my personal reflections and tips from over 15 years as a school leader. Together, we will talk about how to level up our schools and leadership practices. All right, everybody, welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gastard Harrigan. Today, I have a good friend of mine for many years, Jackson Self. We started in the system together, and he has worked and doing some exciting things. Wanted to bring him on to share some of his leadership experiences that he has had both within the school system and out of the school system. So again, let's welcome Jackson Self. Jackson, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, hey, Gastard. Thanks for having me today. A little bit about me. I think we go back almost 20 years now, if you think about it. 17 years of leading schools, over 22 years of being in schools. And somewhere around there, you and I ran into each other early in that in the beginning days. So yeah, it's just great to be here. I started out in the district public school system, so transitioned to charter schools, and then after that, now I am sitting in Invo Healthcare, supporting their education division, and doing some really great things around mental health and behavioral health supports for school districts. So still involved in schools, but just in a little different capacity these days.
Absolutely, yes. You're doing some awesome stuff, both when you were a principal and now using those leadership skills to support school around mental health. Before we jump into that, most of my listeners are school-based leaders, whether they are emerging leaders, principals, or even assistant principal. Just share some of your some of the lessons, your top 3 or top 5 lessons you've learned as a principal leading schools these past 17 plus years.
Oh my gosh, lessons learned. That's daily, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
So I think the first lesson is you need to go home every day and be a very reflective practitioner. I think that's big, especially those early years, but just always really, just as you end your day, think about your day. I used to always think about the conversations that I would have, and I'm like, I could have did that better. Or I could have said that better. Or, that didn't really go the way I wanted it to go. Maybe I should have, taken this approach. And getting to know your different personalities. As a school building leader, it's not okay to just, connect with the people that are more like you, right? That's easy. It's a little more challenging to connect with those other individuals that are kind of like opposite of you, opposite thinking, just opposite personalities. But those people are vital to your campus, and you have to be able to connect, motivate, encourage, and lead them too. So I'd say, sometimes getting out of that comfort zone and really becoming that reflective practitioner going through, that's one major thing. I'd say it's another one. You and I spoke about this a long time ago, but just listening to your people, especially as a young leader, sometimes we want to try to make a name for ourselves, right? And we want to, this is my opportunity. I got to do big things. Not so much. I think you just kind of get in there, listen to your team, listen to what's happening, and try not to do too much. Just really just pay attention to what's happening on your campus. Knock out those big fire items. I mean, if you're thinking of safety, try to do safety, safety first. Everyone is very supportive of safety, especially as a new leader. That's an easy win, and it's something that everyone can see. So if you want to be seen, that's a great way to kind of get that going. But, don't go in there and change all your curriculum and instructional deliveries and, all the methodologies that's happening on campus right now currently. Yeah, it might not be the best, but collaborate with your team, facilitate that vision. So I think those are some key things as a young leader.
It's interesting you said that because oftentimes as new leaders, you come in, you're excited, and you want to go ahead and change everything. And what you just said is key. Listening to your people, building those relationship, making
Yep.
connection. But definitely, you should do more listening than talking. Your first few years on the job, just trying to listen to your people. You are very right. And you said also be the reflective educator. Oftentimes, we don't think about that. Truly, the growth happens. I like to think when we reflect to improve in our various practices and things of that nature. That's awesome. What are some other keys and lessons you have for us?
I'm a big leadership reader, and John Maxwell is my favorite. I know you and I have talked about that too in the past. Maxwell's definitely my favorite. 360-Degree Leader is one of the best books you can read, I think, as a leader. But 15 Laws of Growth is also, I'm also a Maxwell certified trainer, and 15 Laws of Growth is something that you can challenge your teachers with, you can challenge just everyone in your building with. There was a time in one of my schools where there's a whole rubber band effect where you're stretching yourself. You're always stretching yourself to that breaking point. How far can you stretch that rubber band until it pops? And the idea is to not let it pop. The idea is to keep stretching it and stretching it and stretching it. And that's the, on one of my campuses, I was given a bunch of rubber bands after this training with my team. And I think, as a leader, that's always what you're trying to do. You're trying to grow yourself. You're trying to grow your people, just so we can get better every single day for kids.
Right. And it's funny you said that because I'm also, like you mentioned, a huge John Maxwell fan. Read most of his book, but you're correct. The 360-degree leader, being looking at yourself 360 and looking for areas to improve, to grow, and oftentimes I think in the fast-paced principalship level, we often don't take time to reflect, right? Because you are going from one fire to another, especially right now in the polarized and pressure cooker time we are in. Oftentimes, principals are moving from one thing to another. And to all of you principals, or even assistant principals that are listening, you need to take the time to really reflect, take the time to read, take the time to really work on yourself to improve yourself. Because, like you mentioned, reading articles or going to conferences become very important. But let me ask you this: how do you prioritize, knowing that the job of the principalship, and I know you just left the principalship
Yeah.
not too long ago. How do you make time for reading and
Yeah.
self-reflection and growth?
Well, I really don't sleep. But before I jump into that, there's a great book out there. It's an old book, so a lot of folks, it gets overlooked a lot of times. But it's a great book on becoming a reflective practitioner and what it really means. It's by Donald Schoen. It's literally called The Reflective Practitioner, and it was in the '80s. This was written in the '80s, and it's a book that I always have picked up. And there's some really good things in there. But as far as finding that time to read, it's usually late night with the light by your bed, and I that's probably the main way that number one way that I would read would be a little bit before I went to bed. But honestly, every time I traveled, when I was traveling to a conference, when I was traveling to, when I was doing the turnaround work for the past 10 years, traveling to different states and supporting schools, on those flights, I would knock out a book or two a flight there and back, and that was really, really, instead of sleeping on the plane or
Right.
listening to music, I'm reading the book. I did have some colleagues that like the audio. They put the audio books on for their drives, so that early morning drive to work or after school. They found that to be a really good way. I'm more of I read with a highlighter, so the audio books is not my thing. I really like to go back. A lot of times I'll tab pages. I'll use it in PDs. So I'm a more active reader than you know.
It's funny you say that because I'm like you too. I like to feel the book,
Yeah.
but to try to keep up with my reading because like you mentioned, it's sometimes the day is so pressed. When you get home, you just want to crash. So now that I have almost an hour, 45 to an hour, I'm driving to and from school. I have been putting in the audiobook and just trying to be intentional. I think the key thing is whether it is you're an audio person, you're putting it on, you're listening to it, like you're listening to a podcast, whether you are reading physically, got to touch the book like me and Jackson. The key thing is to be intentional about it and making
Very.
sure that it is part of what you do on the day
Hmm.
basis, whether it is when you're heading out to conference, whatever it is, just being intentional on growing yourself and improving.
I'm telling you, some of the best years, I think I was, when I look back, the more reading, I just kind of reflect on, okay, the time periods of my life where I did the most reading, I feel like I was a better leader. I was a better leader for my teams. I was a better leader for my kids, my families. So I don't know. I just think it does keep you kind of fresh and in that moment. And, a lot of it is subconscious. It's just something that's recent. You just read about a situation or story. Now you're presented with one, and there's a best practice to that. And it's just kind of stays at the top. It stays at the top of your memory, or I don't know. I really, look back and say, probably should read even more than what I did back then.
Absolutely. Reading is, as they like to say, reading is paramount. Reflecting on your 17 years of experience as a school leader, as a principal, reflect back. If there's one challenge, if you faced that was really huge, challenging, share that. And what are one or two things you gleaned from that now that you are on the
Gosh.
other side supporting leaders?
So a little bit, I guess, on the flip side of, I just said as a new principal, kind of take it slow, don't go too crazy with big ideas, early on, try to build the team, build the relationships, bring people in through collaborative conversations and facilitate the vision. Whenever I went into turnaround work, there's an immediate need to flip this school quickly, right? Time is not on your side. It's actually against you because there needs to be immediate results. So I look back to over 10 years of supporting, different communities and states, like East Side Chicago, or I'm sorry, East Side Indianapolis, South Side Chicago, the Arlington area of Jacksonville, East Nashville, Tennessee. And I look back to the moments of like South Side Chicago, for example. We had to get in there and we had to change everything. And, there was a 17% graduation rate at this school. And at the end of those 3 years, we were at 76%.
Wow.
We hired a principal. Actually, we went through several principals, but we finally found the one, right? We found the one. And, she was fabulous from the moment she walked in there. You could tell she was the leader. And it was great. It was great to turn that over. But one of those lessons learned is like in those environments, you have to work quickly. You have to work quickly with your conversations, with your relationships. You have to do more than just your staff. I learned very quickly in that turnaround work that I had to win the kids too. Like that was important. Like you have to lay it all on the line in those types of situations. Transparency is huge. So telling them who I am, where I came from, everything that I am as a leader, as a person, was how you have to connect. I had to pull these kids in. They had to see me as someone different than, someone before them that came before me. The greeting every single kid at the front door of the school, like super important. Understanding the different cultures of the campus, having those conversations in the hallways, and I mean, huge to a turnaround project. So, that was probably some of the most challenging work that I've done over the years, and some of the most rewarding.
Absolutely. Like you just said, in those turnaround work, you want to commend, but it's key that even in the turnaround, that where you have a quick time relationship, like you just said, is still important. Being present at your campus is still important. Greeting kids, whether it is fist bump, whatever it is that you're doing to build those
Hmm.
relationship with staff, with student, setting, like you just said, setting in the curriculum work in there to make sure that kids are learning, really scaling up, right? That data-driven instruction becomes key to make sure you're looking at the data and then making those
Hmm.
instructional shifts to improve the core instruction. So it's very important whether you do it slow or fast in the turnaround school. That's key. Thank you for sharing that. In the past year
Yeah,
or
for sure.
so, you've transitioned from being a principal to senior director of strategic partnership. Tell
Uh-huh.
us about why you left the principalship a little bit and a little bit about your new job.
it was just an opportunity, really. It was more of a financial decision than anything else. It was, an offer basically that I just couldn't refuse, and it was still an opportunity to kind of work with teams, work in schools, and do what's good for kids. So there's a you know a serious need for mental health support in our country. I think we can all agree there. So the initial conversation around, hey, we need mental health support, okay, is great. It's well received. But then it comes down to, okay, are we going to really pay for it? Are we going to really, do what it takes at the district or school levels to support the initiative? It's different. I mean, you have outsiders coming in, and I say outsiders, these folks are clinicians, they're not educators. So that's kind of where I add value to Invo Healthcare is being an educator that has sat in the chair, that has ran, schools and multiple programs, et cetera, and understanding how this dynamic has to gel, it has to fit. It can't be a clinic, it's a school, but it's a school that desperately needs true therapists to help these kids. Oftentimes we see the social worker approach, and you know what? Social workers are great, and there is a need for that. But the idea of the social worker setting families up with resources in the community, great, but it's not truly providing the therapy on an ongoing, consistent basis that our therapists can do inside the schools. We don't bill insurance. We literally are working as like hired vendors, if you will, for the districts, and we're putting a person on the ground in your school, working with your teams, guidance counselors, et cetera. So that transition was kind of easy because I'm still working in an environment of schools. I'm still talking to superintendents, to area directors, charter CEOs, et cetera, and even private schools. I guess the shift wasn't too hard, but it's certainly different. It's certainly different.
Absolutely. So, you talked about mental health and the new work now you're doing, and you are correct. Whether it's in my school, trying to be a trauma sensitive school and trying to address students' mental health across the state and across the nation, the pandemic, I think, has accelerated it, but ultimately we have a mental health issue. So, talk to me about the specific program you are referring to that can
Sure.
support schools and districts, and what are some of the outcomes? We know we need it, we know
Yes.
that, but what are some of the outcomes so far, the program you have seen? How has it improved the schools and the
Yep.
students you work with?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Outcomes. We're probably the only, and I'm saying this, and I implore you to do research, because I've been doing research and I can't find another company that's doing what we're doing. We've been doing this pre-pandemic, over 6 years now, and the data outcomes is what it's all about. We have Clemson University that's validating data. They've done it in the past for us. We're looking to do that again here in the future. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic, we want them to hopefully validate some our new data as we're collecting it right now. But some of the things that we're doing that's different than anyone else out there is, we have two specific models that I am kind of in charge of putting out there into school districts. And the first one is upskilling or training of staff. That one's easy, but it's different than your traditional PD. It's, I mean, sure, you're going to get about 15 hours of a, face-to-face interaction. That's pretty typical. But where we separate ourselves from anyone else out there is now, after that, is the application phase, right? Oftentimes, teachers are left to go back to their classrooms and refer to their notes, or refer to maybe an activity they did and try to implore those strategies or skills that they just learned. And that's where we're not going to let them just do that. We're going to put a board certified behavioral analyst, a BCBA, which is basically, I've learned so much on this side. I mean, they're basically doctors of behavior. Like, these guys,
Right.
they know a kid does this and they're like, oh, it's because of that. And anyway, so we're going to put a BCBA on the ground in your school, working one-on-one with those same group of teachers, and I say teachers, but it's really paraprofessionals, special ed teams, your deans, your behavior specialists, those your instructional aides, the people that are called to the calls, right?
Right.
That we have an unruly, disruptive situation, and here we go. And oftentimes it's young APs, it's young, and even older. I mean, it kind of fits for everyone, just to kind of
Right.
bring those, we're upskilling is really the goal. But yeah, those teams up to 15 people for a semester. So our BCBA is there, very strategic, working with them, bouncing ideas and seeing them work with, Sarah, seeing them work with Tony, and giving them the feedback in the moment, which is huge. Now they're there; it's about an hour, and then they kind of move on to the next person, and there's a lot going on. But that one is the training part, and I find that a lot of charters. A lot of charters really like this. Baltimore City Schools have signed on, and we're taking on all of their paraprofessionals in Baltimore and upskilling them and getting them ready to answer the call. And pretty awesome stuff. That's
It,
one side.
right. You are correct. It starts with upscaling the training, the PD that we provide.
Yep.
Really, I like to say core, but oftentimes, like you just said, we forget about the paraprofessionals, the behavior techs, the
Yeah.
people who support. So you are correct. It is starting to train the teachers, and I like the fact that beside training the teachers, the paras, the paraprofessionals, and behavior techs, but also having a clinician working alongside
Hmm.
administration, alongside the support team, whatever that structure is, the support team, to ensure the students receiving the proper, the right behavior interventions or
Exactly.
mental health interventions, whatever the need of that child is. And I think that is very critical.
Well, let me
So
jump in and say all the intangibles that happen, right? I mean, how many times have you, Gastrid, someone would bring a kid to you, and now they have to sit in your office to cool off or whatever it may be,
correct.
right? Well, guess what happens? You can't leave your office now. And now you're supervising a kid. You know what I mean? You think about how often that happens, and you're the principal. Think about often that happens to your assistant principals, to your guidance counselors. Right now they're tied up. They can't do what they need to do. Another call comes out. I'm sorry, I got somebody sitting here. I can't go. Yeah,
No,
so
good picture.
those intangible pieces, and then think of it this way, as an employee, I mean, whether you're a principal, whether you're an assistant principal, instructional coach, custodian, you want to feel valued, right? You want to feel like my organization, values me, invests in me so that I can be better for my organization. And oftentimes that's going to lead to, my willingness to stay, to come back next year, right? We see major turnover in the education industry, and it's always around the idea of, either I don't feel valued, right? The culture's off. I don't feel valued here, and I want to go try to do something else, or there's a life situation that happens. But most of the time, it has to do with feeling valued. And what a better way to invest in your people, that you're upskilling them, you're providing them their own behavioral coach in situations that you might have a young teacher that's in there, just man, and just a lot of behaviors and not really able to deliver any instruction, and they're spending more time redirecting than they are teaching. And you talked about outcomes. I can tell you this right now in Polk County, we had a situation where a teacher was only able to teach, get this, Gastrid, this is middle school, only able to teach 3 to 6 minutes on average for her
Wow.
period. 3 to 6
Wow.
minutes. And I mean, we obviously sat in there and for over a week, and we were able to determine that. And then after having us for a semester, she increased her ability to teach by using the strategies that our BCBA was providing to 40. It was 44 to 47 minutes was the window that she increased it to. Still not a full period. Still not a full period. But in 18 weeks,
That's
18
significant
weeks,
gains.
right? 3 to 6 to 44 to 47. I mean, that is tremendous. She's able to actually teach now. There's actually learning going to happen in that classroom now. Is there still improvement? Yes, there's room to improve. But as long as that teacher remains consistent over time, she will be able to begin to teach bell to bell. And that's kind of what we want, right? So it takes time. It takes time. It's not a magic pill, but it's certainly a way to go if you want to invest in your people.
And it's key, like you just said. You just summarized it properly. It's at the end of the day, it's all about student learning. It's all about student improvement, student achievement, and I think it's important working with that individual teacher, increasing the amount of time she's able to teach and deliver instructions will improve the outcome for students. So, to all the school leaders and principals and district leaders in particular that are listening, it's important that you look into what Jackson is sharing and see how can they come alongside your district, come alongside your principals to really put systems and procedures and upscale and train your people to ensure that we deliver on our core promise, which is a quality education for
Yeah.
every child. So,
And as far as mental health is concerned, I don't mean to cut you off there, but it's, that the training part is really focused on, working with the teachers or with the staff members to upskill them so they can be better equipped to dealing with those high intense moments, where they have to de-escalate kids and work with students. But on the mental health side of the house, that's kind of the other thing that we're doing, right? There's two things that I'm kind of over and putting in the schools. One's the upskilling. The other one is the actual mental health support for kids. And, the way that I see it, it's more like a therapeutic hug. We're going to put a licensed mental health professional in your school, right? On the ground, in your school, working alongside your leadership team, your guidance counselors. And what they're going to do is they're going to take these ACEs and in the clinical side of I'm learning so much, right? These are childhood trauma experiences that happen to children, subconsciously, some like right in your face, whether it's I had a parent that was shot and killed in front of me, like literally. That happens. It's crazy, right? It's hard to think about. Or if it's a subconscious thing, like my dog, died, 2 years ago, but it's still lingering effect on me, and I'm 7, right? So, those types of things add up to childhood experiences and traumas. And what we'll do is we'll basically, it's kind of like RTI. When you do RTI, MTSS for academics, it's kind of the same thing that we do for these childhood traumas. And our counselor takes a tier 3, those critically at-risk kids that maybe they just they were just Baker acted, and now they're coming back to school. So now we're going to take them, right? Your guidance counselor is going to take those students that he normally meets with, right?
Right.
Those tier 2 level kids. So we're working alongside with the guidance counselor and the guidance teams and your behavior teams, and we're really providing that therapy, right? Because this is a licensed clinician. This isn't just someone to just go talk to. This isn't a teacher, a former teacher that got their counseling degree and did some hours, and it's not a guidance counseling. These are licensed therapists. They're here to help you improve, right? It's pretty remarkable what we can do here with this, and whether the child needs it every day, whether the child needs it once a week, whatever whatever the scope of service is required, that's what the therapist does. And then we put a behavioral support person on the ground as well. So we have the licensed mental health counselor, right? Therapist, and then we have the behavioral support person, another person on the ground in the school that is responding, that's helping that behavior team, but they're trained in that response to those negative behaviors, right? They're trained on de-escalating the aggressive. They're trained on assisting with the room clears that we're seeing so often right now in K through 3. K through 3.
Wow.
As a former elementary principal, also, like, it was usually kindergarten. We would have a room clear every now and then. We'd have a meltdown somewhere else, but right now, since the pandemic, K through 3 is, I'm hearing it more and more and more. I was just at a conference here in Orlando, at the Great City Schools Conference, and speaking to superintendents and district leaders, and they're hearing it all the time now from their principals. They're room clear, room clear, room clear. Some principals doing 2 or 3 a day. So this behavioral support person then works with the teacher, the student, right, and the behavioral team. Your licensed mental health counselor on one side doing the therapy that's necessary to improve the behaviors, okay? And that's that therapeutic hug. They're getting it from both sides, a 360-degree hug. And the goal is outcomes. It's to get these behaviors under control. And we have the data to show it where no one else does. You know, we have case studies on kids that that were major elopers, and then all of a sudden they stopped eloping. We have kids throwing things at teachers, and now they're not throwing things. They're still maybe pushing books off the desk, but not throwing them at the teacher now. So I mean, it's that progress being made with these kids. And again, it's not a magic bullet. It's it's certainly something that takes time, consistency, but is great, great, great for kids and schools.
And like you just said, in the season we are in, again, the pandemic has significantly accelerated this. And you're right, K-third students are really have been impacted by the pandemic. And to all, and earlier you mentioned also the teacher shortage. So to all the district administrative superintendent listening,
Mm-hmm.
it's very important that one way or another we're going to pay for it. The question becomes is, do we provide the support to the teachers? Because usually teachers leave between their
Yeah,
within their first third year or fourth year,
that's
because
right.
and number one thing they cite is lack of support, lack of training. And
Mm-hmm.
so definitely having a licensed therapist, a licensed behavior person coming alongside, not only training them,
Mm-hmm.
upscaling their training, but working alongside to help them improve and get to help those students really self-regulate, and the learning
Mm-hmm.
environment will improve student achievement, and ultimately will address, I think, teacher shortages also, because then
Yeah,
more teachers will stay in the profession. So it is
100%.
definitely, I think, is invaluable to all the leaders that are listening, that either you're going to pay for it in the teacher turnover, right? You keep onboarding people and they're leaving in the back end within 3 years, or we could really invest the money in the front end with support, both for to help students self-regulate and to support teachers in the classroom. Like you just said, it is critical. It is invaluable in the time right now that we are living in. So as we wrap up this interview, and Jackson, I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing some of the
For sure.
great innovative work that you're doing to support schools, to support principals. For those principals who are still thinking, you know what, I might be looking for a shift in the next, or a change in the next 4 to 5 years. What are some of the advice you would share with an assistant principal, with a principal who might be looking to do something different, or to shift, to shift and do a little bit something different? What are some of the strategies to set that they can begin to put in place?
Well, I think that I was very blessed early on in having just opportunity to be at all different levels. I've been a leader now in elementary, middle, and high school. I've had experience in traveling to other districts and supporting other schools in other districts, other states for that matter, and and then being successful at it, and moving the schools and getting the schools to another level, academically and performance wise, cultural, driving those high performance cultures, and just really taking the time to grow myself in that, with those experiences kind of set me up to being a quality candidate, I guess, for other companies, if you will. And we have a very unique job, Gastard. I mean, if you think about this, we're running, you know, teams of 100 plus individuals. We're running a financial institution that has 10 million or more, depending. I mean, if you're elementary, you might be about 7 or 8 million, unless it's a really big school. But if you're at a middle school or high school, your budgets are around 9 to 20 million, depending on how large your school is. I mean, you're a CEO of a major multi-million-dollar company, if you think about it, with the amount of employees that you're managing, with all of the student safety. I mean, it's a big deal. The skill set of a principal today, it's a big deal. You have to come with a lot, just a lot. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of energy. There's no down day. There's no downtime. From the moment you take your phone off silence, because I learned that, by the way, that's a trick. Put your phone on silence for a little bit. From the moment you take that phone off silence at 5 in the morning, it's going off. It's going off with people calling out. It's going off with, something's happening, right? So
Something is happening.
something's happening until you go to bed at night. And sometimes you get woken up because someone broke into the school. I've been there. So, I mean,
Yes, I've had to drive
listen,
to school at 4 or 5 in the morning.
as a principal, you're set up. There's no other way. If you're a successful leader in your school systems, in your buildings, and you're set up already, you're practicing skill sets that can translate to just about any job market out there or other organizations. And you're actually a very qualified candidate if you really think about it. So that's kind of, that would be my advice, is to stay in the moment, work hard on growing yourself, because if you grow yourself as a better leader, you're going to be better for your people, and your skill sets are going to grow. uh, so that's pretty much it.
Thank you for sharing that. You are correct. We are CEOs of our buildings, and there's a lot of skill set that are transferable to a lot of major industries. So, as we wrap up, share with us, with our listeners, your favorite book or quote, and why. Why so?
Can't never could, because you didn't give it to try. SHIT to try. Right? I don't know if I can use profanity on your podcast, but I have to, because from where I'm from, that's a quote from my father, and that is my favorite quote. Can't never could, because it didn't give a SHIT to try.
And
Yeah, he used to say that to my brothers and I all the time. Anytime we ever said the word can't, he's like, "Oh, can't never could, because you didn't try." So, it's really, that's kind of the mantra in the Self House forever, from my dad, and that's my favorite quote.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Again, thank you for coming on the podcast. We appreciate. Tell the listeners, those that are listening, how can they connect with you?
Oh gosh, you can. You know what? Can I send you some links too? I can pop over some info also. I'll do that when we wrap this up. I'll email it to you. And but yeah, easiest way to reach me is jself, the letter J, SELF at invohealthcare.com. So jself at invohealthcare.com, and 954-805-6405. Send me a text. I'm great with text messages.
Awesome. Thank you, Jackson, for coming on. Appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me today. Please consider subscribing to the podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and a comment. Share this episode with a friend, and on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for leadership ideas and tips. Again, thank you for joining me today. Until next time.